So yes, Valentine's Day tomorrow, and I just want to kind of share some thoughts on the love theme. Nearly said love boat. No, don't go there. The love theme, but linking it into the ministry of blessing. And I think it might be a bit of an odd Valentine's Day message. But maybe I'm allowed an odd Valentine's Day message, seeing as this is my last Valentine's Day message at St. Paul's. So that's what we're going to be looking at, okay? Valentino, not Rudolph, the early film star of the 20s. He was a bit of a kind of love whatever, wasn't he? I don't know what I mean by that, but you know what I mean. He made the ladies swoon, apparently, Rudolph Valentino. And this is the original Valentino. He was a priest who lived and worked in Rome in the 3rd century. Became an early saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Was actually martyred in the year 269. And he had helped Christians who'd been persecuted by the Roman Empire. The Christian faith wasn't accepted at that time. A few years later, before the Roman Empire adopted the Christian faith as the official faith. So to be a Christian meant that you were in the minority and you were up for persecution. And Valentino, St. Valentine as we know him, helped persecuted Christians. There's a wonderful story actually of when he was in jail of him praying for the daughter of the jailer who was blind and she was healed. It's a great story, isn't it? He lived a life of service and had shown compassion to those in need and those who'd been marginalized. And he was a real example of agape love, that love that just does what you need to do, God's love, the unconditional love, helping the unlovely, the weak and the marginalized. And that's the kind of love that he exhibited in his life. And later it developed, or he developed into a symbol of romantic love, eros love. That's a little bit about Valentina, St. Valentine. So to pick up this theme of love, the gospel reading, Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Trick question. I love how he always answered these trick questions. So he was responding to the question, which is the greatest commandment in the law. And maybe the expected answer by the Pharisees who were asking him and the religious leaders who were asking him was, you know, maybe we're going to quote paragraph, line, and so on, some chapter and verse, some sort of obscure religious law and regulation. But Jesus went right to the core of the gospel, actually. There was a gospel even in the Old Testament, the heart of God. And he just goes quickly to it and said, well, it's all about love. It's all about relationships. It's all about loving God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind. That's the first and greatest commandment. And the second commandment is to love your neighbour as yourself. And that's the core of the Old Testament commandments, which obviously then became the foundation of what we call the gospel, what we know as the gospel in the New Testament and the teaching of Jesus, especially in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the bit I'd like to explore is the bit that might be least likely for someone to explore on Valentine's Day, and that is the bit that says, as yourself. Love your neighbour as yourself. So, in preparing for this morning, I did take the time to read some commentaries and so on, just to kind of see if there's any fresh thinking, new thinking that I just need to be aware of. And most of the commentators say it's about loving God and loving others. If I was writing a commentary, I'd just beg to differ, really, because I think it's loving God, loving yourself, and then loving others. Because it's loving others as you love yourself. So in terms of fitting in with the theme of blessing, linking it in with the theme of blessing, and I hope it's not too tenuous, a link, but I think it's a strong, for me, it's a strong link. We're going to talk about learning to bless yourself. We talk a lot about God's blessing, don't we, and blessing God, and that will be explored in a sermon down the road, what it means to bless God. We're talking about blessing others, and we've explored that a little bit, and we'll carry on unpacking that. Robert's going to be preaching next week about what it means to bless the land and the city and the region in which we live, and so on. Those are all really good topics to do with blessing. But today, I want us to really just focus on blessing yourself, because I don't think very often we think about it, do we? But we are going to think about it this morning. Because the reality is that we can't love or respect or bless others if first we do not love and respect and bless ourselves. If we love ourselves, we can love others. If we put ourselves down, guess what? We put others down. If we are hurt and live in a state of continual hurtness, if that's a term, guess what? We will continually hurt others as we relate to them. So it's this whole thing of self-love, self-care. God being at work, I think we all say amen to that. God's at work in the universe. God's at work in the world. God's at work in the church. God's at work in the city. God's at work in our nation. God's at work. But today we're just going to concentrate on God being at work, first of all, in you and in me. You remember in the days when we used to fly, those holiday times before the pandemic? I know one or two have been away during the pandemic. God bless you if you have. But you remember if you've flown, please forgive me if you've never flown, but if you've flown, the instructions before takeoff. In the event of an emergency or change in air pressure, I always think to myself, then we pray. Where have I put my will? Is my life insurance in place? And let me just say a final prayer. And if ever you've flown to and from Italy, you know, those from a Catholic background, you'll see all this going on and muttering, and I'm not far behind. Okay, so that comes up. But then they say, you know, if that happens, then oxygen masks will appear from the compartment above you. I sound the part, really, don't I, almost. But before you help others, including children, including your own children, put on the mask yourself. And the thinking is that if you're not breathing, you can't help others to breathe. Isn't it? That's the reality. And that's a great analogy, I think, of what I'm trying to just bring home to us today. Parable of the 10 virgins. There were 5 foolish and 5 wise. They all had their lamps. They were waiting for the bridegroom to come. The bridegroom came, but only 5 had oil in their lamps. I feel a song coming on, but I'm going to resist. 5 had oil in their lamps, 5 did not. 5 were wise, 5 were foolish. And the ones who didn't have oil said to the ones who did have oil, give us some of yours. What did they say? Get your own. In a Christian sort of way. They said, no, we've got our own supply, which is sufficient for us. You go get your own oil. Now, we can live off the faith of others to a certain point. Whenever you're down and out, do you know what? Sometimes it's even difficult to pray, to think straight. We've been there, haven't we? And so we rely on the oil of others to sustain us. But that should only be for, you know, periods of crisis and of need. The general rule is that we should have our own oil, your own faith, your own strength, your own grace, your own mercy from God, your own infilling of the Holy Spirit. We can't live off the resources of others forever. So we're talking about, let's just break it down into simpler concepts. We're talking about, first of all, accepting yourself. Accepting yourself. Now, for many of us, we're happy to receive forgiveness from God, but sometimes we struggle with forgiving ourselves, don't we? It could be something little that kind of just brings confusion and lack of peace in our minds. Sometimes it could be something big and real that's in our past, that happened, that we were involved in, and maybe we were even guilty for. But it's forgiving yourself, because if God has forgiven you, we've got to learn to forgive ourselves. Dealing with regrets and mistakes that we've made, sometimes imaginary ones, but sometimes real ones. It's being comfortable in our own skin. This is John Alessi. I am who I am. If you like me, great. If you don't like me, I can't do much about it. No. In other words, that's your problem, not mine, type of thing. Without being kind of bolshy or big-headed about it, it's just saying to yourself, this is who I am, warts and all. And when we relate with others, this is who I am, warts and all. But being self-aware, knowing our own history, knowing the influences in our lives, knowing who we are and why we are who we are, knowing our strengths and our gifts, but I think importantly also our limitations, things that we know that we are not good at. Just while I'm talking about this little subject here, this area here of being self-aware, let me just summarize very briefly Paul's teaching about the body of Christ in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Okay? Because sometimes we can say to ourselves, well, you know what, I'm not really gifted, I'm not really important, I'm not really significant, therefore I'm not needed. And that's a lie, because the teaching of scriptures and Paul's writings and the heart of God is that you are important and that you are significant, and without you, we are weaker. So Paul is saying, if you're thinking that, actually we need you. The rest of us can't function without you. And what Paul is saying, in my words, if I'm paraphrasing, don't put yourself down. Don't put yourself down, because you are important. Even if you think you're not, or even if you think your role is insignificant, you're important. On the other hand, Paul then goes on to say, you might feel that you're super gifted. You might feel that you're so self-contained that you don't need others. The likes of me. You don't need me. You can just do it all by yourself. You can do God's stuff alone. And Paul says, don't build yourself up too much either. Don't think that you are it. This is the other end of the spectrum. Because you need those around you. We're talking also about confidence. We're talking about accepting yourself, being self-aware, and about confidence. I don't know if you remember any of the comments made by your teachers when you were at school. or maybe by a mother or a father or a family member, or a friend or cousin or an aunt or somebody close to you. Comments that was very derogatory, that was a put down. How many times do we hear the words of that teacher? You'll never amount to much. You'll never do anything in life. You are no good. You can't do anything. And we go through life, don't we? Taking that on board as almost our identity. What God said about it. Not those of us who are all kind of gifted, we may think, or able, we may think, but about every human being, even the ones that we label as having special needs or special learning needs or disabilities. Anybody, any human, of any race, of any colour, of any ethnic background. God says to each and every one of the 7.5 billion plus people that are on the planet today, and those who've ever lived before us and those who will ever live after us. He says to each and every one of us that he loves us, that he's proud of us, that we are his masterpiece, his best work. So who do we listen to? In our heads and in our hearts. Paul went through some of this stuff, slightly different context, I get that, but he wrote a letter to the Corinthians, and in it he says, you know what, where does our competence come from? Where does our confidence come from? And basically he's saying in those few verses in Corinthians that our confidence and our ability to do stuff comes from Jesus, knowing that he loves us and that we are called by him. This is not from ourselves, but from God. When we get to that place, it leads to self-respect, which is the opposite of shame. Shame says that you are not worth anything. Shame says, yes, I'm forgiven. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I'm going to heaven, but I'm actually a nobody. What self-respect says is that for God, I am a somebody, even though in this world I'm a nobody. So what about self-nurture? In other words, if you're running out of oil and you've got that lamp, where do you go for oil? And do we go to Craswell's in Longton? You've got oil, haven't you, for... There's Craswell's, isn't it? Richard Craswell. Had a lot of money out of selling gas and oil, did Richard. He was a member of the governing body at the school at the time, and he used to tell me how much money he made, but not so much these days, where he's not closing his shop down. Where do we go for our oil? Well, there are the traditional spiritual disciplines. That's a great saying, isn't it? Sounds a bit scary to me. Spiritual disciplines, oh goodness me. Sounds like hard work. It's not supposed to be hard work. It's supposed to be a joyful experience. Sometimes we have to do stuff that we don't feel like doing, in which case it is a discipline, I get that. But most of the time it should be done with joy and faith and love. Spiritual disciplines of prayer and listening to God. I used this phrase the other week, hanging out with God. I don't mean that in a disrespectful sense, but just sitting in his presence without actually asking for stuff. Lord, I need this, and Lord, I need that. Now, I pray like that, I think, every day, if I'm honest. But if I was only to say that kind of prayer on a daily basis, I've got a very shallow relationship with God. So I do kind of have times where I just sit with a cup of coffee, if you like, or a cup of tea, and I just try and listen to what God is saying to my heart and into my life. Reading the scriptures is important. Fasting, which has never been one of my strengths, that really is for me a discipline. The church, taking the sacrament, all those things I think come under the heading of spiritual disciplines. But it's not this kind of rigid, regimented, religious way of living. Jesus talks more about a rhythm of life, not rules and regulations. It's the shape of our life that matters. Leaving room for God in our thoughts, even when we're not officially praying or officially in church. What's going through our head when we're in Tesco's or besides trying to find the bargains? What's going through our head when we've got that time not to think about anything else? Where does our mind go? Is there room for God in our thoughts in that way? What about friendships? I think it's certainly true for many of us. It's certainly true for me that the older you get, the more you value the treasure of friendships over and above material possessions. I know it sounds a bit twee, but I'm finding it to be a bit true. Not that, I don't value material possessions. I do. But what's really, really important is friendships. And we can get oil from there, can't we? From our friendships and so on. My son-in-law is with us at the moment, and I mentioned to you as well that he's more of an agnostic than anything else. And we were having a discussion the other day around the breakfast table, and my daughter was on about talking about prayer partners. And Charlie smiled. He said, you use funny terms, don't you, you Christians, prayer partners. It's a term that we take for granted, but for somebody who's not got the lingo, prayer partner sounds a bit, I don't know what it sounds like, but it's not part of everyday conversation, is it? So it was great just to say, well to decompose it and try and understand what we mean by it. What are we saying when we talk about prayer partners? I think we're talking about spiritual companions. We're talking about friendships, actually, in the faith, so that we know where to go for help and where people can come to receive help. Aren't we? Friendships are important. What about our passions? Where do we go to find joy and energy and fulfillment? Do those things. Avoid other things that take energy and joy and fulfillment away from you. Take time to nurture yourself, to love yourself, to bless yourself, to pray for yourself. The flip side of this is learning not to live up to other people's expectations, what they want from you, and learning to say one of the most liberating things that you can ever say, which is no. Learning to say no. I'm not here referring to saying no to sin. I think we need to say no to sin, don't get me wrong. But sometimes we need to learn to say no to legitimate things, to good ideas, even God ideas. So you might come with passion and whatever for what God has called you to, and you want to get me involved, and I might want to get involved, but I might not. I might say, actually, no. God bless you in what you're doing, but this is what I'm doing. This is what God has called me to. It's learning to say no. Now, I'm going to bring all this to a conclusion, and some might be thinking, and I was thinking this myself actually, I was looking at this, is this too selfish? Is this too narcissistic? Just so inward looking? Is it too much like that? Well, let's look at Jesus. Let's look at the model of Jesus. Yeah? And this will, I think, legitimize the stuff that we've been saying this morning. Jesus took time, he made time to get up in the morning sometimes early in the morning, in the middle of the night. He made time to rest, to enjoy recreation, walking, enjoying creation that he was very much a part of, to reflect, to talk with his disciples and say, well, how did it go when you went out and you preached the gospel? Time for reflection. And then you can tweak things and redo things, can't you? He took time for renewal in God's presence and prayer. Now, if Jesus needed to do that, and you can finish the sentence off in your own words, if Jesus needed to do that, how much more do I? And then in the priestly prayer in John chapter 17, when Jesus prays his prayer, known as the priestly prayer, he does pray for his disciples, and he does pray for everyone that's going to believe through his disciples, and he does pray for the world. But guess what? First and foremost, what does he do? Who does he pray for? Self. It's for himself before he prays for anybody else. It's interesting, isn't it? Let's not feel guilty in praying for ourselves, in looking after ourselves, in nurturing ourselves, in loving ourselves, because if we don't keep that oil topped up within us, we are no use to anyone. I'm going to close with a verse from Psalm 23, which I did the other week, didn't I? About God's presence with us and going through the valley of the shadow of death, and I'll fear no evil, because you are with me. So another verse from Psalm 23. You anoint my head with oil. It's to do with receiving. It's to do with being loved for yourself, blessing yourself through receiving from God, having our head anointed with oil. That then is enough, not just for ourselves, but it begins to overflow because God's so generous. I used to think once upon a time, that's a bit of a waste. All this attention that God has given me, all this stuff that God says about me, not that I couldn't read it in the Bible and understand it intellectually, but there was a spiritual barrier. There was a real spiritual barrier because I'm thinking God's wasting his time with me. He should be worrying about the situation in the Ukraine. He should be worrying about the starving of Afghanistan. He should be worried about global issues, climate issues. Now, the reality is he is worried about all that stuff. But at the same time, because God is infinite, he cares about you as if there was nothing else to care about and no one else to care about. So he's there for me to anoint my head with oil. And this business of this wastage, I'm thinking, why is he wasting it? Why can't he use this extra oil for anybody else? The reality is he's so generous with me. He wants to bless me so much so that then I can go out and bless others. So when we interrelate with others, we are helping others and blessing others and ministering to others and serving others out of the overflow. It's all the spare stuff. And as we give out, guess what? God continues to give to us. That's how it works. So the overflowing cup is actually to do with loving and serving others and blessing others. But first and foremost, today, now he wants to anoint your head with oil. We have to learn to, I've used the term bless ourselves, it's to receive the blessings from God, to speak to ourselves differently so that we can be the person, the child of God that he's called us to be. Amen.